would follow up and say, what do you say to the man or lady that says, like, how does me greeting people Sunday morning, how's that gospel driven? How does that make disciples? Me serving in the nursery, how does that make disciples?
I think that I would reference Jesus saying, what you do to the least of these is what you do to me. It's an example of us being Christ-like. We're supposed to love our neighbors. We're supposed to love everyone around us. And if people walk into our church and no one says a word to them, no one greets them, no one smiles at them, no one even acknowledges that they're there, how are they supposed to feel the love of Jesus if they just walk in and they're expected, well, just listen to the preacher, he'll tell you what you need to know, and then that's good.
Well said.
So I'm going to go back to Exodus, was they were assembling the original tabernacle, what we would say is the birth of, that's going to be the most fundamental basic church where people gathered to worship God. They met with him there. All of the instructions that he gives to the priest, which we now stand under priesthood of the believer, right? Mm-hmm. All of the instructions about their garments and their breastplate and their headrest and their sandals and their undergarments and the way they were to bathe was prefaced with, when you come into my house to serve me. It never once says, when you come into the house for me to serve you. Mm. And so at the very foundation, at the very beginning of God designing a place to meet with man, he stated purposely, you are coming to serve. And we lose that fundamental connection to the basic instructions of God's given when we go, well, I come here to be served. And beyond that, we also let go of the control of our peace when we do that. If I have to have you do certain things for me to be at peace, I've now given you control over my spiritual peace. But if I find my spiritual center in serving, you really can't take that from me. I show up, I serve faithfully, and I find that purpose and that drive and that fulfillment. I own that spiritual peace. Me and Christ have centered that up. I've no longer handed the control of it to the people around me where, well, if the music leader doesn't do 6 songs today, I'm just going to ruin my Sunday. If the preacher preaches over 30 minutes, if I have to have other people doing those things for me, I'm basically a spiritual welfare recipient. Where what I want to do is come into this place and Christ, I am a slave to Christ alone. I'm not to be a slave to anybody else. And so I need to come and find my fulfillment in Christ in serving, because it's the only way I can really have ownership of my central peace in Christ. Because if you have to do it for me, it is out of my hands, and it can be taken away from me by another human being, and that's outside of what God's designed for us. He wants us to have a secure peace in Him.
Well, that was all very good. I don't have much to add, but I will add something. I really love what John 15 said. I'm pretty sure it's 15 where he's talking about the vine and the branches. But Jesus says, I ask you to do these things to keep my Father's commands, not for any harsh reason, but so that your joy may be made full. And I can just attest to, even before I was a paid staff member of a church, whenever I served my church, my local church, I felt that joy made full. So just something to think about. Now, this next question is a hard one, but it's one that we've all been thinking about for months. It is, how did the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, how did it reveal wrong attitudes we had about church?
How did it reveal wrong attitudes? Well, first, I think prominently, I think many people who would call themselves passionate living Christians, really found themselves saying, well, the governor stopped church. And he might have stopped the worship service of church, but really only when Christians quit following the commands of God and quit doing what he said can you actually stop the church. Yeah. And I think one of the things it exposed was, for the most part, believers in our country we're back to that spiritual welfare. They've moved to that place where they're going, the preacher does it, the church does it, the building does it. It's a plague of the American church that we will stay in a business meeting and vote for the church to do something. I'll never forget doing a questionnaire and handing it around. I'm really getting to your question. I really am. I handed a questionnaire around the church about ministries we wanted to start and things that people were willing to be a part of. And we had 70-some people fill out the questionnaires and turn them back in. And all but 2 of them said, we really need a bus ministry to effectively reach our community. No one said they'd be willing to drive a bus. No one checked they'd be willing to drive a bus.
Wow.
And so there's the epitome. We want the church to do it, but we don't want to have to do it. And that is a fundamentally flawed, I am the church, I want the church to do something, but I don't want to do it. There's a hole in that logic that when you say it that way, well, that just sounds silly. But then we say, well, I think the church should. And would you want to? Well, no, I don't want to. Well, and so I think the pandemic, when it put the building under lockdown, and so now the church was left to be the church and function and do the work of the church.
Not a building that we
Not
go
a
to.
building.
Yeah.
It was left to be there. All of a sudden people were saying, well, the church can't do anything right now. Well, the church should have been able to do everything the church was doing before. And what the truth is what it exposed is that is how much the church is doing. The American church is just not really doing much. There's a very, very small percentage of the people that call themselves the American church that are actually functioning as Christ followers, passionately serving Him. And so I think it exposed this flaw that we think the church is doing this. And actually what's happening is the staff and a few of the deacons are doing most of that. The church at large is not.
I would say COVID, I don't know if it revealed so many things to me that just stand out that I could give you bullet points of what it revealed. But I think it revealed a nature of what's going on in not our church, but the American church in general. There's a statistic I saw recently that said during the pandemic, only 2% of Southern Baptist churches grew. And I think that's indicative of a problem. Very much goes with what Joe's saying, that once the doors closed, the quote unquote work stopped being done because it became very limited in scope. You're not, a lot of churches use their services as a great place to grow. People invite and people do that, they do, but if there's not daily ministry taking place by the hands and feet of the members of the church, then the church will not grow during a pandemic. It will shrink and shrivel, and when you come back, you won't even have some that were devoted followers supposedly come back, and your church will be smaller. And that's exactly what we've seen in churches all across our country, that they're coming back and everybody's 50%, 75%, 80%, or 20%, whatever they are, there are less than what they were when they left.
And I heard someone else saying it, so I'm not going to take credit for it, but I heard somebody talking about that, and what they were saying is what this has exposed is there were people that were coming to church because it was just the place to be on Sunday in small town America. Yeah. Well, during a pandemic, a group of people is not the place to be. Mm-hmm. And so now those individuals that were coming to church because it was the place to be in small town America, they're not coming. And it just exposed a lot. Now you can't blanket that and say everybody that's not coming, they used to only come because it was a popular thing to do. But I'm saying there's a lot of people that aren't coming, it was a popular place to be in small town America, and now it's not, therefore they're not coming. And it's exposed that reality. I don't know that it exposed but it exposed that reality there's a lot of people that were coming to church because it was a popular thing to do.
Yeah. And I'll only add that